I'm going to show you why I think it's important to press seams to one side or the other. This is an example of how many seams have to be matched. So I'm going to, this is the edge. These are 2 blocks sewn together, and I'll show you those in a minute. And so we come across here, and there's nothing to match here, but we come here and we have to match these 2 points. And to match them correctly, we like to have nice, sharp 90-degree angles and points that meet together. So how we do this is, this fabric here, the seam allowance for this one is pressed to the right, and this one is pressed to the left. So if we continue down here, there's another seam here. Although this is still the same fabric, you still want the seams to match. And this seam is pressed toward the left, and this seam is pressed toward the right. And as we keep going, these 2 are exactly the same, but this top one is pressed toward the dark fabric, and this bottom one is pressed toward the light fabric on each side. So you have these opposing pressing directions, and it allows you to interlock those seams, and we'll show that in just a minute. So if we continue to go down, then we have the repeat of it on this side. Here's a matching seam, and finally here's a matching seam, and then the end. These are 2 blocks that I pieced together. They're very large blocks, so this is one, it's 17 inches, and this is the second one, it's 17 inches. When you piece blocks or anything together, the block that has more seam lines, more seams in it, I like to put those toward the feed dogs on the bottom. So this is one block, this is the second block. This block has 2 long pieces here that are straight fabrics, and if you put the seams next to the feed dogs take those seams and ease in the fullness if there's any. If you had these long strips of fabric next to the feed dogs, there's no way it's going to ease in. It's just going to push the fabric in at an even pace, and it just makes a difference. It's not much, but it makes a difference. So I'm going to show you how I pin these to, and how I actually sew them at the sewing machine. Here is the side of this block that I want to stitch to this top block. And so since I'm going to put these long pieces of fabric at the top and these against the feed dogs, I place this one down. And I always start at the very first intersection. And if we take this and we look at these 2 seams, they're going in opposite directions, so they're going to interlock easily. And we pull them next to each other. First we try to match the top edges as close as possible, and then you can feel with your fingers and sort of shift it with your fingers, and you can feel it's absolutely flat when they're completely interlocked. And to keep this interlocked, I pin at each interlock. And what I do is I put the pin in at an angle like this. The seam allowance is about 1/4 of an inch down, or it is 1/4 of an inch down, so it's going to, the needle will push in right about here. If I put this pin at an angle, let me turn this around, I'm stitching in this direction from here down, and as I come here and my needle comes here, I can leave that pin in as long as possible until the needle sometimes is right on the seam line. And that's what I would really like, is to have it right on the seam line and make sure those 2 pieces of fabric stay interlocked. And you can tell with your finger because there's a lump on either side if they're not interlocked. So I put them at an angle like this. Let's turn it back around. And then I'll just come over here and pin this edge. And it can be straight. So this top fabric is straight fabric. There's going to be no easing, but there's a seam here that will help ease in some fullness a little bit better. So we go from here to the next one and we check this seam and we see that these will need to interlock. And we do the same thing. Line up the tops, feel for the interlocking, and place the pin at an angle. Okay. And the next one, there are going to be 6 interlocking pieces. And then here is the last one. And finally we'll pin the end here, just like we did before. Okay. Now I'll take this to the machine and show you how I piece it together. Okay, I'm going to take the first pin out, and then we'll start stitching. And I always use my needle down. So we're stitching at 1/4 inch, and we're just going to the first pin. And if you can see, I'm getting to the first pin, and I'm going to let it stay there as long as possible, but I'm going to, I'll pull it out with this finger. As soon as it starts to get near the pin, like right here, I'm going to pull it out. And then just keep going. And then stitch to the next one. Do the same thing. You see that since the pins are at an angle, you can wait till the last possible minute to pull it out. And then when I get to the end, I just hold the end in place and then finish the stitching. And now we get to check to see how well we did it. So there's one. It's pretty close. There's the second one. There's that one, the third, and the fourth. And there's the fifth one right here. And the sixth one.